Hi, my name is Malister, and today I'm going to be showing you my Sentinel tank build for Neverwinter in Mod 19. Let's start by talking about race. There are two races that I consider to be best in slot for tanks. There's the Metallic Ancestry Dragonborn and the Aasimar. The Metallic Ancestry Dragonborn increases the maximum hit points of your character by a total of 3%. In addition, it gives you a 3% damage increase and 1500 critical strike. You also get 3% more healing from all spells. The Aasimar increases your damage, outgoing healing, incoming healing, and maximum hit points by 1%, and additionally you take 1% less damage from all sources. In addition to that, you also have the Celestial Presence ability. When you're in a party, you gain 1% more hit points, and this effect doesn't stack. So in total, you're getting 2% hit points and 1% less damage. Now, based on just numbers, Metallic Dragonborn is better for tanks. But because fashion is the real endgame, I choose to go with Aasimar. Let's talk ability scores. You want to put your points into Strength and Constitution. Strength increases your stamina regeneration rate and also your physical damage boost. Stamina regeneration is important because it increases the rate at which your stamina regenerates. This means you can take more hits more often using your block. The physical damage boost is helpful because it increases the damage that our encounters deal. And since most of our encounters count as physical damage, this means we're dealing more damage, so we're generating more threat. Constitution increases your maximum hit points and your action point gain. Maximum hit points are important because as tanks you want to have as much HP as possible. The AP gain also helps since it lets us fill up our dailies a little bit faster. Before we discuss gear, companions, and mounts, let's take a second to talk about stats. In Mod 19, enemy ratings for the current hardest content in the game are 40,000. In order for players to get the maximum bonus from their stats, players have to have 50,000 higher stat ratings than the enemy stat caps. This means players have to have 90,000 stats to be fully capped for the newest Adventure Zone Avernus and in the newest endgame Trials Aerials Challenge. Additionally, you need to be fully capped to be capped when you get scaled down in older dungeons. Now, certain stats like critical avoidance and combat advantage and awareness work a little bit differently. In order to be capped here, for critical avoidance you need to have 5,000 more stats than the rest of the stats. This is because enemies also have 5,000 higher critical strike, and since critical avoidance is the counter to that, we need to have an additional 5,000 stats in critical avoidance. Combat advantage allows you to get 100% total damage bonus, and since every 1,000 points above the enemy stat ratings counts as 1% total to whatever stat, in order to be fully capped for combat advantage you need to have 40,000 plus an additional 100,000. So that brings us to a total of 140,000 stats for combat advantage. Awareness currently caps out at 100,000, but this is one stat that you don't need to focus on because it only works to counter the damage from combat advantage that enemies will have against you. And all you have to do is make it to move so that the enemies are all in front of you. And if they're in front of you, they don't have combat advantage. And this is why you don't need to worry too much about investing in awareness. In terms of stat priority, you want to focus on first getting your defense capped and then your critical avoidance. These are your two most important stats as a tank. Once you have these things capped, then you can focus on raising some of your other stats. Armor penetration and accuracy are your next most important. This will make it so that your attacks actually do some damage, which will make it easier for you to hold aggro. Ideally, you want to have everything capped, and this puts you in the best possible situation to hold aggro and also to stay alive. Now, while you're getting these stats capped, you don't want to forget about your HP. You want to stack up as much HP as you can, and we'll talk about where you can get all this HP from. When putting together a build, it's a good idea to do so without a primary artifact equipped. This way, you can make sure that your stats are capped and that you'll be able to use any artifact that your party needs you to. Now, as for the gear, for the most part you want to pick the stuff that has the highest item level. Gear with higher item level gives more HP, and as I mentioned earlier, we want to have as much HP as possible. So I'm using the Blessed Helm of the Skyblazer. This one's pretty good because it increases the power of your character by 10,000 when you're fighting against a single enemy, which means again in boss fights you have an extra 10,000 power, and that makes it easier to hold aggro. I'm using the tactical rank 15 on this for the 2% incoming healing. Then we have the Lion Guard's Ward Scale Mill. Now the Divine Armor from the Redeemed Citadel is also another option. It has the exact same effect, and actually it can be upgraded to item level 1260. 10 more item level than this one. I just don't want to put in the work to upgrade that gear right now. Next we have the Spike Defender Vambraces. Now these have a little bit lower item level, but I use them for their effect. You gain 1% damage resistance whenever you hit an enemy, and that stacks up to 5 times. These are helpful when you're taking tank busters as the off tank in Zerial, because you'll have that 5% extra damage resistance for that tank buster hit. Then we have the Blessed Whips of the Shadow Demon. I use these because of the effect as well. Whenever you get struck by a critical strike, you have a 10% chance to increase your maximum hit points by 20%. And you also gain 3% defense for 10 seconds. Now the defense just adds around 2,000 to 3,000 more defense here, so it's nothing special. But the 20% hit points increases your HP by almost 200,000. So that makes a huge difference in your survivability. For our weapon set, we're using the Celestial weapons. We have the hit points modification slotted, and I use the critical severity. You can also use the stamina regen one or the incoming healing. Those are all helpful. I prefer critical severity just because it makes my attacks do a little bit more damage, which means I have an easier time holding aggro. For the weapon modification, you could use the Challenger Slash one. I don't bother changing it between Brash Strike and Challenger Slash. I prefer to use this for my DPS side. And then for the enchantments, you want to have Bronzewood. And I use 1 Tenebrous because it helps do a little bit of damage, which helps increase our aggro. Here I'm using a Dark enchantment just to help cap out my armor penetration. Over on the right side we have our artifact set. I'm using the Redeem set here, and there's no particular reason why I chose this over any of the other ones. For tanks there really isn't a best in slot set, and you can use just whatever you feel like using. I kind of like this one for now, so I'm going to stick with this. But another good option would be the Mad Mage set, which increases your damage by 5%. When you stand still for 3 seconds. And I'm using a tactical here in my offense slot to help cap out my combat advantage. Then we have the Tanner's Hardened Leather Ring. This thing's equip effect essentially hits a second time whenever you use your daily power. And so this helps out a ton when you first are starting off combat and you need to grab aggro and hold aggro. Can make a huge difference. The Vollenhof Family Seal I'm using mostly just to help cap my deflection and combat advantage. The effect isn't anything special, but it can be helpful, such as in Phase 2 of Zerial's Challenge. Then we have the upper pack brands of the Blaze Bond and the pants of the Hell's Interrogator. These I'm using mostly just because they have the highest item level, so they give the most HP. The set bonus on these isn't that active because my stamina usually isn't above 75%. I usually use my stamina up all the time so that I can keep my Primal Fury at full damage, which I'll talk about in a minute. And the effect on this also isn't that helpful. You barely get any AP from it. Now for artifacts, I primarily use the Wyvern Venom Coated Knives, but I can swap out to whatever I need to because my stats are overcapped here. Then we have the Frozen Journal and the Flayed Storyteller's Journal, and these are just for the set bonus, which increases our total hit points by 10,000 per book. And then of course we have the Golden Memories artifact to complete the redeemed artifact set and get that bonus. Looking at our utility stats, you can see that I have 71.5% stamina regen, and we can get this a little bit higher if we were to use the stamina regen weapon modification, but most of that stamina regen is coming from the Elven Battle enchantment here, which increases stamina regen by 40%. Then you have another 15% coming from the strength bonus, and then some more from Boons. We also have 108% crit severity, which essentially is doubling my damage from critical hits. So that's really helpful when you're holding aggro. Let's talk about threat. All tanks have an increased threat power, and ours is called Will of the Sentinel. This increases the threat our powers generate by 360%. So that means every one of our attacks gets a 3.6 times multiplier when it comes to the threat calculation. In addition, we can also use powers like Threatening Presence, which has an increased threat generation effect. This increases the threat of our powers by 20%, or a 1.2 times multiplier. And lastly, we have powers that have the increased threat effect. This increases the threat generated by that power by 800%, or in other words, an 8 times multiplier. So in total, we have 3.6 times 1.2 times 8. So you have roughly a 32 times multiplier when you're using those three things in combination. And so it's important to use these increased threat powers over, say, Sure Strike, for example, which has nearly double the magnitude, but it doesn't have that increased threat effect. So this generates much more threat than using this power. For both my single target and AoE loadouts, I use Challenger Slash and Sentinel Slash. Challenger Slash is my primary at will. It's the one I use most of the time. Sentinel Slash I only use to proc the feat Frustrating Slash. This increases your threat generation by 20% for 10 seconds. For encounter powers, I use Punishing Charge, IBS, and Primal Fury. Primal Fury is our primary threat generation power. Unfortunately, the magnitude of this power varies based on how much block you have left. When your block is full, the magnitude of this power is only 100. And as your block gets emptier, the magnitude increases up to 600 when your block is empty. So that's why it's important to get your block down as quickly as possible at the start of a fight, so that you can use a full magnitude or a close to full magnitude Primal Fury. For our dailies, we use Savage Advance and Battle High. Savage Advance is useful just because it's a high magnitude at will, or a high magnitude daily, and it has the added effect from the Crushing Advance feat that reduces the enemy's damage by 5% for 12 seconds. Battle High is a really good power to increase your survivability when you need to take tank busters, and it also helps heal you a little bit. Now for our class features, at the start of a fight you want to use Challenger's Charge along with Threatening Presence. This way you're generating more threat, and it's better that we overdo it with the threat generation than not have enough at the start of a fight. Later on, once you've gotten 20-30 seconds into a fight, you can swap Threatening Presence out for Mighty Vitality. This increases your HP by about 10% at the cost of 5% of your power. Another option is to use Steady Rage, but I tend not to use this very often. You can also use Trample the Fallen to increase your damage, but regardless, you want to keep Challenger's Charge on your power tray. Now, as for our feats, as I mentioned earlier, we're using Frustrating Slash. This increases your threat generation by 20%. The other option is Leap into Action, which is a feat that affects Mighty Leap. Unfortunately, we don't use Mighty Leap very often, or at all, as a tank, so this feat doesn't do much. For the second set of feats, we're using Indomitable Might. This increases the magnitude of IBS by another 200, and that decreases as your hit points decrease. The other option here is Short Slam, but we don't use that at will. We don't use Sure Strike here, so this doesn't help us much. For the third set of feats, we have Disarming Takedown and On the Move. I use Disarming Takedown, although I rarely use this takedown effect. The 10% debuff here, it is the same as the one that every other physical class has, and so it doesn't stack. So if a TR is using Wicked Reminder or HR is using their 10% buff, this effect won't stack with them. Now, Crushing Advance helps to give us a little bit of that damage mitigation, 5% damage mitigation whenever we use Savage Advance. The other option here is Undying Instinct, which essentially makes it so that Primal Instinct here will make you invulnerable. Unfortunately, some attacks can still kill you, so it's not that helpful to have. And then for the final set of feats, we're using Rage and Rally here in the single target loadout. And so the thing with Unstoppable is, I don't use it in when I'm tanking. This thing doesn't help you at all. In fact, it makes you more susceptible to being killed. When you're in Battle Rage, you can't turn off your Battle Rage, which means you're going to take every hit on your block. This means enemies can burn through your block and you won't be able to regenerate it fast enough if they happen to do a tank buster while you're still raging. So it's safer not to use Unstoppable. However, if I do happen to accidentally use Unstoppable, Rage and Rally can help fill up to 40% of my stamina, depending on how much rage I started with, which can be helpful in order to recover from that mistake. Now for our AoE loadout, as you can see I'm using the same at-wills, but for the encounters we're using Come and Get It, Not So Fast, and Primal Fury. And these are all AoE at-wills. Now Primal Fury I have paired with Blood Fury, and what this does is when you use Unstoppable, the cost of Primal Fury becomes 0. And so you can use Unstoppable, take damage, and let your block get burned down a little bit. And then when you fire off Primal Fury, it will empty out your rage bar and damage all the enemies around you. Whatever damage you deal to the enemies around you, you'll be healed for that amount. So this combination, Primal Fury and Blood Fury, helps to make you virtually immortal. So I love this combination. It's probably my favorite power feat combination in the game. Aside from that, the only other real major difference between this loadout and my single target loadout is this on the move feat. And I just use this to help move around a little bit faster, get through those dungeons a little bit faster. And so this paired with not so fast helps to do that. For our class features, I just use Steady Rage to help increase the rage generation, since you don't generate as much rage in content outside of endgame. And then we're using Threatening Presence for that increased threat multiplier. For boons, you want to focus on the HP ones first, so get that to maximize the HP your character has. Then you want movement speed and companion influence. After that, you can choose to invest points as needed to help cap out your stats, and then you can put the rest into power. I've also chosen to invest in this Demonic Mastery boon. In Zerial's challenge, the second bosses count as fiends, so this can help out, give you 5% more damage and 5% damage reduction against those bosses in phase 2. For the tier 5 boons, we're using Second Wind for the stamina regen and Quick Turnaround for some recharge speed. We have some really long cooldowns on some of our powers, like Enduring Shout, so this helps out by reducing the cooldown by about a second or so. And then for our Master boon, we are using Focus Retaliation. This can reflect almost 1,000,000 damage in Zerial's challenge, so it's really helpful in holding aggro. For our Master boon, or for our Guild boon, sorry, we are using either Power or Critical Severity. It's honestly up to you which one you have and which one you want to use. I like using Power most of the time. The thing is, if you don't get a critical hit with those first couple attacks, the Crit Severity boon doesn't really help you much. For our defense section, we're using hit points. For our utility, we are using Revive Sickness. Here we have our companion. As you can see, I'm using the chicken. This is not the Abysmal chicken, it's just the regular old chicken. It's an augment companion, and it gives bonuses to your critical avoidance, combat advantage, and defense. And so we got our 3 rank 15 bondings. A note about that actually. In mod 20, which is coming up in about a month or 2 months from now, these will be removed from the game, and there's going to be a complete companion rework. So keep that in mind if you're focusing on upgrading some of this stuff. It might not be best in slot in about a month or 2 from now. For our companion equipment, we're using the blessed icon of the companion. This gives combat advantage. It also has 1 offense and 1 defense slot, and I'm using enigmatic runestones there. We have the Ivy Grown Talisman of the companion. This gives critical strike and accuracy, and I'm using 2 arcane runestones to help cap out my armor penetration. And then we have the Briarwind Sword Knot, and here I'm using 1 critical or 1 enigmatic runestone and 1 profane runestone. For our companion power here, I'm using Potent Precision for a little bit of extra critical severity. Then we have all HP companions here. For mounts, I'm using Stalwart for 60,000 more HP. I got this using the Armored Bear. There's a couple other mounts that also give this bonus, like the War Triceratops and the normal Triceratops. So I recommend going into the auction house and finding the one that's cheapest, and then upgrading from there. For the combat power, right now I'm using the Griffin's Piercing Screech, which gives 15% damage reduction for 10 seconds. Another option is the Bat Swarm, which also gives a 15% damage reduction, along with some other effects. And a third option is using the Boulette's mount power, which also gives 15% damage reduction. You can also use something like Tunnel Vision, If you don't need the damage mitigation, this will help you hold aggro. This 3000 magnitude attack will do a lot to help you hold aggro. For our stable, we're using all Fortitude insignias. If you don't have Fortitudes or you can't afford them yet, you could also use a Prosperity insignias. The only difference is that Fortitudes give some defense and Prosperities give some gold bonus and I think glory. And then we have 2 times Gladiator Guiles here, so that's a total of 15% movement speed. Artificer's Persuasion helps us reduce the cooldowns when we use our artifacts. For these two, I prefer using these just because I have the insignias for them. But you can also use things like Champion's Return, Knight's Rebuke, Oppressor's Retrieve, or Shepherd's Devotion. Those are all great bonuses. For our mount collars, we're using Critical Severity, Encounter Power, Incoming Healing, and Stamina Gain. And this last one doesn't really matter, I'm using Rough Astral Diamonds. And lastly, for our consumables, we are using the Caprice, which increases our deflect by 10% and gives us another 5% additional HP. We've got the Prime Rib or Sembocade. Either one, they both give about the same HP. We have Foehammer's Favor Elixir, and this increases our deflect by 400 and our deflect severity by 10%. And lastly, we're using the Superior Flask of Potency, mostly for that extra combative critical severity. And now for a quick demonstration on how I grab aggro at the start of fights. So you want to start with Punishing Charge. You're going to go in, use your Sentinel Slash to trigger the Frustrating Slash effect. Then you want to get as much damage in as you can with IBS and your daily. And then we're going to use artifacts, and then he's going to be doing his Tank Buster. After the Tank Buster, we'll use our Primal Fury, and then from there we're just using IBS and Primal Fury as often as we can. We'll use Punishing Charge if we happen to lose aggro. So let's get started. Punishing Charge, Sentinel Slash, IBS, and daily. Artifact. Use your at will here and there when you can. Primal Fury, IBS. Try to block as often as you can. At this point, you want to swap out to Mighty Vitality and Enduring Shout. That's it for this guide. If you have any questions, leave them in the comments below. And also, if you want to check out a written out version of this guide, link for that will be also in the description. Thanks for watching.